Hello, everyone. My name is Celucien Joseph. I'm the host of Center for Faith, Reason, and Dialogue. Today, we have another pleasure opportunity to do a book launch, Third Wave Feminism and Feminist Patriarchy and Neoliberal Globalization, published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing. And the book is written by Dr. Paul Mocombe, Dr. Tomlin, and Dr. Ericcson Mapfumo. So please allow me to introduce the authors, then I'll give you a summary of the book. Paul Camy Mocombe is a Haitian philosopher and sociologist. He's a former visiting professor of philosophy and sociology at Tomlin University of Philosophy and Sociology at West Virginia State University, and the president and CEO of the Mocombian Foundation. He is interested in the application of his theories of phenomenological structuralism and consciousness field theory to contemporary issues such as the constitution of consciousness, race, class, capitalism. Dr. Mocombe, who for 10 years argued for the nullification of nature, which he posits is associated with consciousness and the multiverse, is the theory of phenomenological structuralism, Haitian epistemology, identity and ideology, Jesus and the streets, race and class distinctions within, and in latter Florida and the United States with his wife, Tiara S. Mocombe. Those who want to learn more about Dr. Mocombe can visit his website, paulcamymocombe.info, or readingroomcurriculum.com, or Mocombian, MOCOMBEIAN.com. Reverend Dr. Carol Tomlin is an ordained minister and multi-award winning scholar who has a long and distinguished academic career in teaching universities nationally and internationally. She is currently a visiting fellow at the University of Leeds. She's a former healthcare chaplain, the senior leader of Restoration Fellowship Ministries, and the founder and principal of the Kingdom School of Theology. She's the author of publications so Understanding African Caribbean. Dr. Paul Mocombe, for example, industrial society, everyday risks, is often invited as a keynote at national and international academic conferences and faith-based forums. Reverend Dr. Ericcson Mapfumo is a priest in the Church of England, a university chaplain, academic, and post-colonial scholar. He's also the author of Black Clergy in the Church of England, Towards a Sense of Belonging. This book was published by Palgrave Macmillan. He's interested in issues to do with social justice and has a bias towards those on the margins of society. So let me go forward and introduce the book. Again, it's an honor for me to introduce the book, this book launch, Third Wave Feminism and Feminist Patriarchy and Neoliberal Globalization. In this book, the authors use Mocombe's structurationist theory of phenomenological structuralism against feminist theories to put forth the argument that the third wave from 1990 to the present of feminine activism against the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism of the West has given rise to feminine patriarchy, the negative dialectical push by women for equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution with their white male counterparts by recursively organizing and reproducing the patriarchy, which is only a particular of the universality of the system, of the society, to convict it for not identifying with its ideas, ideals, and values, which are institutionalized as the nature of reality as such, and a paradoxically genderless position of their own. So women have pushed negative dialectically for integration and equality of opportunity, recognition and distribution in the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism as gender neutral agents of the Protestant ethic against any other alternative forms of systems or social integration, which renders the historical activism dialectical, negative dialectical, oppressive, and exploitative. Furthermore, the authors reify, commodify, and glorify their gender identity. I'm sorry, not the author. The references to the women, I'm sorry, glorify their gender identity as feminine man, the ability to be and do as men, despise being women, a gaze they would like their male counterparts to also assume by celebrating their success in the system. Now, Dr. Mocombe will speak first for 15 to 20 minutes, followed by Dr. Tomlin, and then Dr. Mapfumo will conclude. Then we give you an opportunity to interact with the authors, to ask questions, also to voice any comments that you may have. So let's be Dr. Mocombe, whenever you're ready.
There's some background noise. Can everybody just mute their videos, please? There's a little background noise. I don't know if it's on my end. Somebody, if they can mute somebody is on. Can everybody else hear that, or it's just me?
Hey,
Nas 95, can you mute yourself, please? Can he mute himself? Can we message him to mute his Okay, thank you. Good Saturday afternoon on my end. I know in the UK it's late. I want to thank Dr. Tomlin and Dr. Mapfumo for coming out tonight. Before we get started, I did receive my author copy. I don't know if Carol received hers. I know Ericcson received hers. Wanted to address an issue real quick. We had a different cover design, which I tried to capture the essence of the theory in the book. It didn't play out well. Carol had a problem with it. My family had somewhat of a problem with it as well. It was, but as my aunt said, if I have to explain the book cover, then I shouldn't put it because I'm not there when everybody purchased the book cover. But anyway, the cover came out nice. This second book, Third Wave Feminism and Feminist Patriarchy and Neoliberal Globalization, is it's a 3-part series that I have with Cambridge Publishing. The first book was the first book was actually Neoliberal Globalization, which is an offshoot of my work trying to highlight the structure of the global structure of the contemporary age that we live in, what Emmanuel Wallerstein calls the capitalist world system. We tend to think the global apparatus of the capitalist world system is different from its local manifestation in different nation states, but they're all interconnected. So what I wanted to demonstrate is the structure of the neoliberal global project and how it, against critical theory and against some other theories, how we then internalize the ideas, values, and ideas of the neoliberal project. So that was the first book. The second book was Black Assimilationism and Neoliberal Globalization. That was with myself, Carol, and Ericcson as well. And the last one is the multipolarism in neoliberal globalization. That's the last book in this particular series. And what I attempt to do, because one of the issues we face is trying to understand, is there a distinction between social structure and human agency? Is there a connection between the two? Are we a product, solely a product of the social structure, or is there a human agency? Now, this argument dominates all aspects of social theory. It's formulated in the free will determinism argument in philosophy. It even dominates theology, whether or not God has free will or is everything determined, etc. So in grad school, I tried to resolve this issue, which is known as the structure agency debate in the social sciences, through a theory I developed called phenomenological structuralism and consciousness field theory. Now it's important because when I was in grad school in the early 90s, the theories that were emerging at the time throughout Europe as well as America, throughout the West, was postmodernism and post-structuralism. And what postmodernism and post-structuralism does is it attacks two foundational aspects of theoretical understanding about social life and material life. It attacks science itself. With postmodernism, most post-structuralists, Foucault, Jacques Derrida, Paul Feyerabend, what they argue is that, and this is a reaction to what we call Kantian philosophy. Kant introduced the notion that we can never know the nature of reality as such. Kant makes a distinction between phenomenon and noumena. We can know phenomena, but we can never know noumena. So he introduces Kantian idealism. The problem is you get European scholars, especially amongst the French, who, because of that particular distinction that Kant makes, they argue that, well, if we can never know noumena, and science and scientific research is constituted on the understanding that we can know the nature of reality as such, then science is impossible. In fact, there's no human reason. Science is impossible. It attacks meta-narratives in the academy. By meta-narratives, we're talking about it not only attacks science, it attacks religiosity, it even attacks the nature of being human, because it argues that there's no, and this is building on David Hume, there's no such thing as a subject, because the subject is contingent upon a sui generis person making decisions about their life based on reason. Well, that's impossible if we can never know noumena. So that was the emerging theories that dominate the academies when I was writing. And I had a problem with that, because in place of the human subject, what emerged was this notion that all narratives are viable, anything goes. In fact, Paul Feyerabend calls it epistemological anarchy. So because you can't justify science, then any meaning in any narrative is just as good as any other narrative. So now we start to get the emergence of queer theory, the emergence of African American studies or the emergence of LGBTQ and so you can choose to be and do whatever you want to. But there's a problem with that. It even dominated physics because in physics the notion was at the quantum levels we can never know the subject determines reality. So whatever reality you can conceive of is determined, it has the probability of existing in reality. That's problematic because the brain does not construct reality out of itself. You cannot choose to see anything you want to. That's not how neuroscience works. If those theories were legitimate, then I can choose to see whatever is in front of me. I could not see that Carol Ericcson or Dr. Liu is not sitting in front of me here. So I begin to attack the notion of postmodernism and post-structuralism itself. And in doing so, I also had to attack Black studies. I also had to attack critical gender studies. I had to attack queer theory. And this is the emergence of my theory of consciousness field theory and phenomenological structuralism. It's a counterattack against this notion that we can't know reality, et cetera, et cetera. So in doing so, when I applied my methodology, all I argue is that, yes, we can. I'm against Kant. I do believe we can know noumena. I do believe in the scientific process. I denounce this notion of postmodernism and post-structuralism. And when you apply that to, let's say, women's studies, or let's say the feminist movement, you get different conclusions from the theories that would emerge, especially in women and gender studies from the 1980s on up. So basically, this is an attack on not only the origins of consciousness, but it's undermining what postmodernism and post-structuralism have done in the academy. And so when we apply this to feminism and feminist studies, the earlier book, Black Assimilationism and Neoliberal Globalization, attacks the notion of Black studies and Black consciousness itself. What is the origins of Black consciousness and neoliberal globalization? The early wave feminism is attacking feminism because when you look at the research, what you find that you end up with the same conclusions, theoretical conclusions regarding Black life that you do in gender studies. For example, Dorothy Smith in the 80s developed this notion called bifurcated consciousness to explain women's consciousness. Now, how does that differ from W.E.B. Du Bois' notion of double consciousness? It doesn't. It's the same thing. Why is it the same thing? Because bifurcated consciousness simply say that women have a double consciousness, just like W.E.B. Du Bois is saying Blacks have a double consciousness. So how is it that women at the end of theorizing about the nature and origins of feminist life, they come up with the same conclusion, liberal socialist feminists come up with the same conclusion that W.E.B. Du Bois comes up with? Something is missing here. So when you apply my theory of phenomenological structuralism in the origins of consciousness, you come to understand how is it that Blacks theorizing about Black consciousness, women theorizing about women's consciousness, come up to the same conclusion, because what they're trying to explain is the origins of structural differentiation within a larger social structure, which in our book we call neoliberal globalization. So basically, feminist theorizing identify the two things. They identify the nature and origins of female consciousness, three things. Is there a female consciousness that is diametrically in opposition to male consciousness, etc.? And the nature of activism of women against, let's say, patriarchy, for example. So there's two things that feminist theorizing is doing: the origins of consciousness and the origins of feminist activism and the theorization. So it's theorization of female consciousness. So it's three things. The theorization of it, they're trying to understand the nature of female consciousness, theorization about that consciousness, and feminist activism emanating out of that consciousness. And in the West, there's what, hence the first part of the book, Third Wave Feminism. There's four theories that attempt to understand all three facets of feminist theorizing. You have what's called the gender difference model, represented by people like Simone de Beauvoir, who argue that there is a feminine consciousness that diametrically opposes male consciousness, and this is represented by phenomenological analysis of consciousness. Is represented by existentialism, as de Beauvoir was, interactionalism, and cultural differences and biological differences. So yes, the gender difference model argues that women are biologically different from men, and this biological difference is not only biological, it's interactional, it's represented by how women interact, their views of reality, their views of sexuality, they're less aggressive than men. So these cultural differences are real, they're grounded in biology, and they make women different, and they give women the ability to govern differently and constitute society differently. So that's the first model. That's the gender difference model. And what the gender difference model is arguing is that in order to resolve any sort of oppression that women may experience in reality, what we need to do is to constitute society to take account of the differences between men and women and allow women to maintain that difference while also experiencing equality between men. So that's the first model. The second model is what we call gender inequality model. So what gender inequality model argues is that, well, yes, okay, let's assume there are these differences, but these differences should not be expressed in the marginalization of women and segregation of women in the society. Instead, women should fight for equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution to resolve some of the oppression that women are experiencing in society. So the gender inequality model, they recognize the fact that, yes, there are these differences among women, and this is usually represented by liberal feminists. Most liberal feminists highlight the inequality of society, the gender inequality in society, and seek to fix or resolve the inequality by fighting for equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution. So that's the first two models. We have the gender difference model. We have the gender inequality model. And the third model is called what we call the gender oppression model. Now, this in the academy is represented by what we call radical feminists, what we call post-structuralist and postmodernist feminists. They tend to be trained in psychoanalysis. People like Julia Kristeva out of France, Gloria Anceluta, they represent this model. And what they argue is that, yes, the biological difference between men and women give rise to matrifocality among women, patrifocality among men, and in order to resolve some of the inequalities in society, women should disengage or separate themselves from the patrifocality of Western society and constitute their own society based on the matrifocality of being women. So they identify the fact that, yeah, there are that cultural difference model, the gender difference model highlight, they account for that. They argue we should not seek to incorporate it into patriarchal society. Instead, women should constitute their own society based on this matrifocality. They emphasize lesbianism, women women interaction with one another, and against the patriarchality of Western society. And last but not least, we have the structural oppression model. And this is represented by socialist feminists, such as Dorothy Smith, who argue that the condition of women has nothing to do with their biology. It has more so to do with their structural roles within Western society. These structural roles are oppressive. And for example, roles such as motherhood, women shouldn't work, etc. So these differences are not biologically immutable. These differences are a result of structural differentiation within the society. And in order to resolve some of these issues, women, and building on the gender inequality model, the structural oppression model argues that women should fight for equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution. And once they're in a leadership position, we'll see the resolution of these models. So those are the four models that try to explain or theorize about the condition of female consciousness, the condition of women in society, and how we should resolve some of these contradictions. And there are three ways, they all identify three waves in this fight for, because what in turn happened with the end of history discourse that would dominate Western society post the 1990s, introduced by Fukuyama, who argues that the end of history in the once the fall of communism will lead to the end of history, in which there would only be one model standing, which is the liberal democratic model in the West. Now, as a result of that, the dominant model that would come to fruition in the West is the liberal gender inequality model that would come to dominate Western thought against. Although we're starting to see the emergence of the radical feminists represented by the gender oppression model. So when we look at that, this model has identified, the gender inequality model has identified three waves of the fight for liberation for women and the activism of women. The first wave was this fight by women for political rights. Now, this dates, and we're talking about in the West here, this dates from 1848 to 1920. This is Susan Rice and all of the racist white women who would dominate the movement in the 19th century and early 20th century. So the fight was for political rights and to participate and vote, etc. That dominated the first wave of female activism. So for the most part, they accepted the fact that women were biologically different. There was a female consciousness, but this did not negate the fact that women should have voting rights and the ability to vote. Whereas within patriarchy, the understanding was that because of the emotionality of women and the differences, the biological differences in women, they could not be relied upon to make rational choices by voting. And so that was the first phase. The second phase, or the second wave in feminist activism in the West, would be dominated by, and this dates from about the 1960s to about the 1990s, and it would be dominated by this fight for equality of opportunity recognition, the liberal fight. What happened is, when women received the voting rights, now the next fight became equality of opportunity, equality of recognition within patriarchy. And now we get to the third wave of feminism, which dates from 2000 to the present, where what is the basis of female activism within third wave feminism in the West? Well, that fight continues to be the rise, given this combination between the end of history and the rise of liberal democracy. The fight becomes this continual fight for equality of opportunity, recognition. Now the fight becomes, as we argue, and this is the third part of the book, what I argue is called, what I call feminine patriarchy. Third wave feminism is identified by what I call feminine patriarchy. So what is feminine patriarchy? Feminine patriarchy is this fight that since 2000, the fight has been for women to not only participate, the continual liberal fight for equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution, but now the fight has become, we can be just as good as men, if not better, within the dominant neoliberal social structure. So what you find are women who, in their behavior and their actions, are no different from their male counterparts in whatever social role they play. Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, their behavior, Elizabeth Warren, their behavior, their warmongering, how has that been different from what we find among the men contemporarily dominating the scene? They're just as hawkish. They're just as, it's as though they've internalized the patriarchy against all this malarkey about women being different because of their biology. It's as though in their fight for equality of opportunity and recognition and distribution, they've internalized the ideas, ideals, and values of Western society, and they're more patriarchal than the men themselves. So we get people like Hillary Clinton. We get people like what's the crazy one that's over that is now at Columbia. Oh, her name slips my mind. Who are just as aggressive. They're just as passive. Now, this is a combination of not only the attack on meta narrative, but it's also in the, what I argue the theorizing has failed to take into account is that what has happened is that we fail to realize that, yes, we assume in the work, we assume the notion that, yes, there are biological differences between us. I'm not a postmodernist. I'm not a post-structuralist. We see the difference, even though now the dominant theme is we choose our narratives. Yes, there are biological differences, but what makes us who we are, as Daniel Dennett argues, is socialization within a social structure that not only interpolates us, but also differentiates us. So female differentiation within the society is not based on biology contemporarily. It is based on their socialization within the neoliberal class model that dominates contemporary society. And as a result, and remember, just as in the case of Blacks, the fight was for equality of opportunity and recognition, which leads us to the fact that we have Black men who are more white supremacists than white supremacists themselves, because they, in their socialization within a white racist settler colonial system, the fight was not against the social structure itself, but acceptance within the social structure. And I'm going to end on this so I can let my other artists speak. There's a very, we always look at the liberal fight for equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution, which dominates both the contemporary feminist model as well as the Black fight for equality. We always view it as the universal mechanism by which Blacks, women, queers are fighting. Their fight is for integration within a system that is deemed to be the nature of reality as such. Remember, the neoliberal Protestant capitalist world system is viewed and is instituted as the nature of reality as such, and the fight for all of these marginalized others and all of these marginalized differentiated identities is not to attack the systemicity of the neoliberal model, but instead is to integrate it. And when we do, and this is what postmodernists are arguing when they attack the meta narrative, because they realize the danger of that. Because when you fight for equality of opportunity and recognition and distribution, what you're saying is you agree with the universality of the system. You only seek to participate in it, and therefore the model, the understanding is that the system is legit, and all we're asking is that we integrate the system, and we universalize that fight for equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution, which becomes problematic because we view the aim of Blacks as representation, the aim of women as representation within the system, the aim of queers as representation within the system. And what postmodernism is identifying, no, there are others who don't want, who attack the system. During the Haitian Revolution, this is where I will end. During the Haitian Revolution, we always viewed the Haitian Revolution through the eyes of the Creole Blacks. Toussaint, Dessalines, the Blacks who were fighting against slavery, who were fighting for recognition of Blacks as human. But what we fail to realize, when you go into the history of the Haitian Revolution, that's not what all of the Africans wanted. The Africans, represented by leaders such as Makaya and Sun Suu Kyi, they were fighting against not only the system of slavery, but they were fighting against being recognized as Black representative of an oppressive system. And I say that to say, the dominant liberal feminist model is not fighting to overturn the system, because we can see people like Elizabeth Warren, Hillary Clinton, and all these women, Kamala, all these women in leadership positions. They're not fighting to overthrow an oppressive system that threatens the reality. It threatens, and this is the problem with narratives. The current system that we're trying to integrate or be represented in is problematic. We have to change it. And fighting for representation, the representation of women within that system, the representation of Blacks within that system, does not change the system. And therefore, we're still recursively organizing and reproducing a system that threatens the nature of reality as such. So I'll end on that and allow my other colleagues to speak.
Paul, I think you
All
said
right,
it.
thank you, Dr. Mocombe. Dr. Carol Tomlin, it's your turn.
I think Paul, I think Paul, to be honest, because to be honest, Paul, I actually made some notes based on Paul. You can see my copy stuff, and you literally rehearsed it all, right? So I'm looking and I'm like, did he have my notes here in front of me? So I'm probably gonna just take it from a slightly different angle, because I was actually going to explain third wave feminism, because I thought, well, he's not explained that, and you did very eloquently. So I don't want to go on and on as I usually do, explaining. Really, you gave the nuts and bolts of the book. What I would say is a couple of things. And we, Ericcson and I, have looked to Paul for the underpinning theory. And I actually thought, Paul, to be honest, I thought this is one of the best books. What, in terms of the theory, I thought the theoretical underpinning was absolutely brilliant. I was like, oh, okay. So I thought that was brilliant. And when we devised the book, obviously we drew on Paul's theoretical construct of phenomenological structuralism. I can never say that word. But as I said, there were a couple of things that I'd like to point out in terms of what I think feminism failed to do, and you've highlighted that, Paul, eloquently. In many ways, like the fight for Blacks for freedom, is they didn't present an alternative form. And I think, again, that's highlighted quite well in the book. There was no alternative form. And instead, there was a reproduction of the status quo of the organizational framework of the system. And in fact, what women have done, they haven't sought their own agentic means and praxis to actually present a model which is workable, which distinguishes between the current forms of oppression. And what we argue, in many ways, they're culpable to their own oppression by reproducing the same kinds of male attributes. And in some ways, hence the title, Feminist Patriarchy. A lot of people have been very intrigued by that juxtaposition of feminism and patriarchy. Even the so-called radical feminists, those who are balking against gender oppression, they still haven't formulated an alternative model and an alternative form. And in wanting to replace patriarchy with matriarchy, well, you can't replace one with the other and still fight gender oppression. And I'm going to use my Christian framework. We need each other. We need each other because God created us together to work together. So a replacement of one, and you actually want to replace men with women using the same agentic means. So, and in some ways, what we argue as well is that you're still feeding into a fascist type of system in doing so. And it's interesting. I was actually watching the TV just away from the book, but it feeds into the themes of the book. There is a view that women can have it all. And there's actually a book that's just come out. I haven't got the author in front of me. The Myth of Making It. And what women have done, and I think it does parallel with Black people, Paul and Ericcson, is they have been self-sacrificial in terms of, in some ways, sacrificing themselves in order to get ahead, number one. Secondly, it's almost as if women have become grateful to have the jobs that they have. And I would argue, like their Black counterparts, there's the view that they have to prove themselves, and in proving themselves, hence the feminist patriarchy, because then they take on the ideological praxis of men to prove themselves. Are you following me? That's number two. And the other thing that they do, which I think follows on from the themes of the previous books that we've said, is that you can overcome hurdles by working harder. So again, hence the feminist patriarchy. And as you alluded to earlier on, Paul, some women are actually more warmongering than men, because now they're having to prove themselves. And in doing that, they have become honorary men, the very thing that they are fighting against. So the juxtaposition of feminist patriarchy, I think, and that was Paul's creation, I think was a really brilliant juxtaposition of some women. And on top of that, which we haven't tackled so much in this book, is obviously Black women. Because Black women with the womanist theory have sought to provide an alternative to the white feminism, because they felt, well, we weren't included. But again, I don't even know where to begin with that. There is still that not offering an alternative form of womanhood which seeks to be non-oppressive. And I'll stop there. Yeah. Because as I said, Paul had said it all. So I just wanted to perhaps take it from a slightly different angle and to emphasize a couple of things. But you know, one of the things that I found as well that we highlighted that was very interesting, and I'm not even sure if there is a conclusion that we have posited in the book, is this power relations in terms of socialization and the 5 systems of the mode of production, language, ideological apparatuses, ideology and communicative discourses, you know, what you have called, Paul, in previous work, social class language games framed by the power elite as a means of production. So in other words, it's the power elite that are still in control. So it's still your white elite men that are not only in control of the means of production, the resources, and we did make mention as well, you know, even, you know, global warming and the climate change brigade, as somebody called them. All of that is still controlled by white men at the top. And in some ways, the fight for freedom and, if you like, liberation actually has fed into the Protestant work ethic. So it hasn't, as we've said, provided an alternative form to the system. So I'll end there. I think, Paul, we can't hear you.
Before you go, Ericcson, I just wanted to feed off Carol real quick. Carol brought up some interesting points. I think one of the most brilliant theorists, Black theorists, is Frantz Fanon. I just think out of all, for me, Frantz Fanon is one of the most brilliant. He doesn't get enough credit. But it feeds into what Carol is saying, because remember, Fanon, black skin, white mass was his first analysis of the Black condition. But he also he has a debate between himself and Jean-Paul Sartre about what would Black liberation and Black freedom look like. And he, in the end, he adopted what Sartre, because what he argued was that Blacks had to use the other terms to constitute a Black consciousness. He would renege against that later on in his life, and he highlighted what Carol just mentioned, the need for an alternative humanism. So Fanon is not a postmodernist, even though a lot of post-colonialist theorists and a lot of postmodernists and post-structuralists will adopt Fanon. Fanon is not attacking the subject. He believes in the subject. He believes in the rational subject. But he's calling it the only way to defeat white supremacy, to liberate women. He doesn't get into the queer thing, but the only means of liberation for Fanon is an alternative universe, is an alternative, what he calls a new humanism. And that's important because and this is the problem I have with most feminists, white feminists especially, when men constituted the neoliberal project, whether it's from Kant, whether it's in the sciences, whether it's in, they did not do it from the male perspective per se. That means they universalized their humanism. They argue that this is the model for all humans, not just for men. And this is why when women are fighting for freedom, they're not many outside of the gender oppression people. Many of them don't attack the systemicity of the model. They're attacking the representation or lack of representation of women in the model. So you produce a Hillary Clinton, you produce a Victoria Nuland, a bunch of crazy people, just like their white male counterparts. And what's interesting, and there's a parallel, because the reason why I keep juxtaposing Blacks, women, and women is at the end they end up with the same conclusion. But look what we're witnessing contemporarily. We have Black people represented in the power dynamics of Western society who are white supremacists. They're supporting white supremacy. You look at AFRICOM is led by a black man, Michael Langley. He's trying to steal resources from Africa. He represents American imperialism and Western imperialism. You have the brother that's over the Defense Department who's supporting the Nazi regime like Ukraine. And it's so paradoxical, these black folks in power position, the sister that's from America that's represented in the UN, she's justifying oppression and you would never see that coming given the experiences of black folk. You would think they would have constituted an alternative model, but they have not. The fight has always been, well, since the end of the Black Power movement in America, the fight has been for equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution. And now you have black folks, male, female, it doesn't matter, justifying and representing Nazism, fascism around the world. It's just insane. Go ahead, Ericcson. I'm sorry, brother.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, I think my esteemed colleagues have said most of the things, but I suppose I've got a few reflections that I want to share with us. So for me, it seems that all the time when we try to make advances in society, we realize that sometimes the past is forgotten, or things that have been discarded in the past resurfaces sometimes or once again using different terminology, which obviously Paul and Carol have mentioned. But in my work as chaplain, I've discovered that with one of my colleagues at the university, we're talking about environmental issues, and simple living being promoted and eating organic foodstuff. And as part of my ministry, I'm also involved in Eco-Mission, where we think of the environment and its impact in society. However, what is interesting is that sometimes the past comes, that's what I feel, to haunt us, because part of the secret is that when this happens, when the past comes, we try to close our eyes and hope that something new emerges. But it takes boldness to be able to face and say the truth from our frame of reference. And this is what I feel is what is happening here, especially in this particular book. We're using Paul's theory of phenomenological structuralism to argue, obviously the arguments have been noted. So I think what I'm saying is that sometimes the truth itself can be difficult to hear, and people continue to cover the truth or change it. So like the first example that I've started said, now we're concentrating on simple living, organic eating, and so forth. But if we realize that in Africa, for example, in Zim, or Africa more generally, people are being called savage, and yeah, it was looked down upon until now, when obviously the West think perhaps there's something beautiful about simple living and eating organic food. I'll skip some of the things. So as we said, feminist movements were based on feminine activism against male domination. And what we observe that, in fact, this activism, as we see more recently, is coming out as feminine patriarchy, where women are now the ones who want to control. In fact, we see that women push for equal rights, and as has been said, that women have reproduced patriarchy. So for me, all this that we're seeing it's a continuation of the colonialist agenda of setting the rules of engagement, of determining what is important and what we must aspire to become. Hence, we now see that women are happy if I don't know if they're happy to occupy some of the positions that men once held. But what remains important to note is how are their own feminine qualities being promoted? I mean, if ever there's something like that, how are they becoming their own kind of individuals? So just to give an example, just like me as a Black African, if I think of myself as someone with another identity, yeah, of course, without mentioning names, if I think of myself as someone whom I'm not, people can either believe me, but that's not going to make any difference to who I am. Because each time that I go to bed, I'll be knowing who I am and some of the struggles that I might be facing. So we are saying that when women try to conquer men or be like men, they are being what they are fighting. I think it has been explored by my colleagues. Just paraphrased it a bit. So the question for me as well as a religious leader is that what do we do with this knowledge? How can the perspective from this book help us to in our day-to-day lives, especially in religious institution? So for me, I know obviously some questions will be coming, but I think for me, the most important thing is that the theory itself who can help us to reimagine the future, but also reimagine how do we engage with other people. So I'll leave it at that to allow obviously more questions. Yeah, thank you.
The interesting thing for me in all of this is we're witnessing contemporarily this notion, because what happens in postmodernism and post-structuralism, whether you apply it in Black studies as the Afro-pessimists attempt to do, whether you apply it in feminist theory as Julia Kristeva and all of the crazy French people who attempt to do, the problem is that we're witnessing, the problem that they don't take into account the consequences of saying that there's no meta-narrative, anything goes. We even have with this emphasis on my story, my truth. We even have pedophiles now fighting for their rights to touch little boys and girls, whatever. But this is the problematic when we're not attacking the system. What we need to do is attack the system itself. And what we're witnessing globally now, if many of you watched the debates the other night, it's clear that Joe Biden is not of his right mind. There's something wrong with him. But the narrative that came out the following day was by his wife was, oh, he's okay, he's fine, he had a cold. That's the narrative. So everything becomes about narrative at the expense of the structure that is governing the dominant narrative and dominant ideology. So now, when the power elites put a woman as the face of imperialism, all the women are cheering. Oh, at least we have a woman represented. Or when they put a Black, and their thing is now we put a Black queer woman as the face of imperialism. Oh yeah, all the representations are there. She's Black, she's queer, and she's a woman. Oh, let's cheer for that. Whoopee! The insanity that we're facing today. Look at the whole Brittany Griner affair. Joe Biden went out of his way to release this woman who was put in prison by the Russians because she had a marijuana paraphernalia. And the media emphasized the fact that she was queer, had a wife, she was Black, and she represented the embodiment of America. she was a representation of the idea of contemporary post-industrial, postmodern ideals. And what was interesting, the Russians made fun of that. They thought that the Americans were insane, that we would cheer foolishness because of representation. Blacks contemporarily are cheering the fact that Lloyd Austin is the head of the Defense Department, and he's promoting a Nazi regime that would lynch him if he walked down the street of Ukraine. That is insane. Michael Langley is the head of AFRICOM, and he's representing American imperialism. Victoria Nuland is a warmongering crazy woman who wants to declare World War III on Russia, but we're cheering. The women are cheering because she's at least she's in the position of power. The insanity is beyond a belief contemporarily what we're witnessing. And instead of fighting for an alternative system, and for me, the alternative system is not based on feminist equality. That's nonsense. That's just imputed consciousness, a result of structural differentiation. Men said women are more emotional, blah, blah, blah. The women embrace this notion as though it's grounded in their biology. Yes, to some extent. You put estrogen in a man, he starts to develop feminine quality. You put testosterone in a woman, she starts to develop male masculinity. To some extent, some of the notions are biological, but for the most part, they're social structural. But we're cheering female representation, representing the most patriarchal acts in the world. You have women who are supporting the bombing and killing of children in Palestine. Insanity. And women are supposed to be caring, loving. That's insane, nonsense. So we need an alternative humanism. And this is how we conclude the book. We need an alternative humanism. And for me, Carol argued for a more, because of her Christian background, that new humanism should be based on the kingdom and the following of Jesus. I take it a different route because in our culture, as a Haitian man, our African ancestors, they developed in Haiti, they developed an alternative model in Haiti against the capitalist world system at the time when they fought the Haitian Revolution. We call it Lahuism in Haiti. It's no different for me when you compare that to what Carol is calling for. Ericcson would have to leave the Anglican Church for his model to work. But we need an alternative humanism, not this emphasis on representation and equality of opportunity, recognition. That's a perpetuation of the current model, and we have to overthrow the current model by emphasizing what Fanon called a new humanism to replace the Enlightenment humanism that would emerge out of liberalism and all of that nonsense. So that I will end on that, and we get Lou back in and ask questions if there are any questions.
What I would say, if I can just
respond. Oh, go ahead.
Paul, it's interesting because I thought for all of this representation, things have actually taken a retro, have gone back, for all of this representation of Black women, yet both groups are still oppressed. So it's very interesting for all of the liberation, both groups are oppressed. And another interesting point, how do both groups feel? Those who are in positions, quote unquote, of power, do they feel fulfilled as individuals? So again, representation, what has it done? Representation, integration, what has it done? And how has it benefited these groups within the current system? That's just a thought I had, because it seems, you know, gender violence, domestic violence is on the increase, although some people say, well, it's always been that, whatever. Again, you know, more Black men are being put in prison and what have you. More Black women don't have husbands and are saying they can do bad all by themselves, even though they're yearning for a partner, a male partner, by the way. So all of these representative means, how has it really benefited these groups, Paul? That's
It
just
was interesting, Carol, that you brought the notion of domestic violence. Some studies show that we have the WNBA here, which is a counterpart to the NBA. It's a female basketball league, which is dominated by a bunch of lesbian women, Black lesbian women, which, you know, funny thing is you have this young woman, this white young woman who just got into the league, and the league is becoming popular. And some people highlight the fact that that's because she's a heterosexual white woman in a league dominated by Black female lesbians. But what's interesting about that is the level of domestic violence among lesbian couples of the WNBA. And then the claim was female, when you look at the gender oppression model, well, women are more sensitive and they have better relations between each other. But yet, the level of domestic violence coming out of that league is on par. It might even exceed the general population, which is insane.
Remember, even in so-called same-sex couplings, they still take on a gender and a male role.
Many of them, yes, absolutely, absolutely. It's just insanity. We're experiencing insanity. This is where I'll agree. This is where I'll agree with the Christians. It's as though we're living in Revelations. It's insane.
Living in Revelations. That's for another debate. Definitely living in Revelations. My sister and I have been saying that, you know, and you've written about Revelations yourself. We're definitely living in Revelation. Everything that has been presented in Revelation actually in front of our eyes. Dr. Lowe, over to you.
Okay, wow. What a great presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Ericcson, Dr. Carol, and Dr. Paul. Now, let's open the floor for questions or comments. It's a pleasure to have Nadine with us, and Emmanuel Nass was here. I guess he stepped away for a minute. But I do have a question for you, Paul. Paul, so I guess
You're breaking up, Lou.
hold it. You're making a clarion call to explore a different model, an alternative to feminist patriarchy, right? Another alternative to postmodern view of sexuality and gender. You mentioned you referred what's his name, French Fanon's idea of new humanism. What are the characteristics of Fanon's humanism? What you know? What are the promises of that new humanism?
Great question, Lou. Brilliant question, brother. One of the aspects that Fanon points out, and is represented even in our own system in Haiti, the Lakou system in Haiti, is that there needs to be a homeostasis, a balance between we as creatures inheriting a planet with other beings, and we need to have a balance between our needs and the needs of other species and creation within that universe. A little balance between harmony and destruction. That's the first notion, that we need a balanced life. This notion of overconsumption, and Ericcson pointed this out as well. There needs to be subsistence living. And one of the key aspects that we're not highlighting, if everyone lived like people in America, there would not be a planet. We consume more than we need. In fact, we throw away food. So there needs to be an emphasis on underconsumption and subsistence living, as Fanon points out, living in harmony with nature itself, living a balanced life between ourselves and other beings. The other aspect is a form of, and Carol pointed out, communalism. Now, with the fall of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was was state capitalism, just like we have contemporarily is neo-feudalism. There needs to be, we have to take into account my needs are dependent on the needs of other people. My grandmother had this saying when I finished grad school. My grandmother sat me down, and she comes out of that La Cruz system in Haiti, and she told me, "You're not here by yourself. Never forget, you're not here by yourself. There's others who sacrifice themselves so that you can get an education, so that you can live the life that you live, and always give back." So there's this notion of communalism that must dominate the new humanism, a notion of balance between us, society, and nature itself, and also what Fanon call homeostasis, and this notion of under consumption and subsistence living. We need to stop consuming. And this is why I juxtapose feminine patriarchy with neoliberal globalization, because the neoliberal global model, under the auspices of an American imperialism, attempts to curtail the development of other countries so that America and the West can continue their way of life. It's the same thing in slavery. The metropole needed to ascertain as many colonies as possible in order to sustain the metropole itself. They had to underdevelop the rest of the world so that the English, the French can live an industrial and post-industrial lifestyle. And this is what we're witnessing today. For America to sustain in the West, for them to sustain the way of life that they have to underdevelop the rest of the world. Do we see the mass poverty around the world? At night, people are throwing food at the grocery store, they're throwing it in the garbage. This is unhealthy, it's unsustainable. So we need a subsistence way of life, a communal way of life, balance between ourselves and others and nature. This is the new humanism that we have to promote. Not this overconsumption, greed, all of this. What is it? America has embraced, the neoliberal project has embraced all of the deadly sins. Let's be honest. Greed sells, sex sells, everything sells. Let's just exploit one another, take advantage of one another. And this is unsustainable. It really is. We're willing to go to war so that America can promote its perverse lifestyle. This is insane. So this new humanism must take that into account. We have to change the way we live. It's just unsustainable.
Are there any questions on Facebook? What page is it? What page is it posted to?
There's actually a question. Marie asked a question.
Good.
I would like to ask how feminist patriarchy contribute to the deployment of Kenya police in Haiti.
Oh, what a brilliant question. Because what we're witnessing in Haiti is an excellent point. I'm glad that Marie Nadine brought that out, because what we're witnessing in Haiti is the consequence of this liberal emphasis on representation. Because what the West, America in particular, is doing is they're using representation to socialize the other, the Black other, the female other, into this neoliberal project. For example, and I'll tie this back to Haiti. At the outset of the Ukraine war, to deter other nations from siding with Russia, the American government deployed Kamala Harris, Linda Greenfield in the UN, to Africa and other third world countries to emphasize this notion on protecting their LGBTQ society. Kamala Harris went to Ghana, gave a speech about the Ghanaians protecting the LGBTQ community, which had absolutely nothing to do with why Ghana should or should not trade with Russia. The emphasis was on protecting the Western way of life, and to do that, they could not send a white man or a white woman to Africa. They sent, quote unquote, the Black woman to speak about LGBT, protecting the LGBTQ, even though the Ghanaians can barely eat. The same thing is going on in Haiti today. They're using Kenya, the elites are using Kenya, Kenyan women, Kenyan men to go and, instead of a white face being represented in Haiti, occupying Haiti, that as the U.S. did from 1915 to 1934. Now it's not occupation because, it's other Black people from CARICOM and from Africa to do the work of white folk. They're even doing that with our religion, with voodoo. They're trying to queer voodoo in Haiti. There's a group called Courage in Haiti, which gets funding from the State Department to promote homosexuality in Haiti. It's just insanity. But this is the notion: when it's done with a Black face, when it's done with a Black with a gender, an alternative gender, it's not imperialism. It's not racist. It's not sexist. It's not heteronormativity. Because hey, it's a Black face. So we have to make sure we look at how representation has been used to oppress. For example, before the whole Kenyan occupation of Haiti, what America did, they backed CARICOM to try to organize different countries to go and occupy Haiti from the Caribbean community, because the understanding was, it's a Black face, so therefore it's not imperialism, it's not occupation, it's not American imperialism. That's absurd, because what we're dealing with, as Fanon pointed out, is a Black skin, white mass. That's all we're dealing. We're dealing with Black, white. I call them Black white supremacists. The late Nathan Ayer just passed. He has a great book called Black Anglo-Saxons. That's what we're dealing with. That's what we're dealing with when we're looking how U.S. empire, and this is nothing unique to the U.S., because the Roman Empire did the same thing. In order to control what they call the barbarian hordes out in Europe and in the outskirts of the Roman Empire, they educated a few Gauls, Celts, etc., Anglo-Saxons. They educated them and used them to represent the ideals of the Roman Empire. This is why at the fall of the Roman Empire, the dominant emperors were non-Romans. What are we witnessing now? Obama was a white supremacist. Obama destroyed the most prosperous country in Africa, all for American imperialism, Libya. This is insane. And we justify it because, he was the first Black president. Yippee, let's cheer. Okay, good. Let's be happy with that. So we're watching as the elite use representation to continue the initial oppression of the other, the initial exploitation of the other. That's what we're witnessing contemporarily. So women, men, queers are doing what used to be done by white men, but now it has a more humanist face because it's done by a queer, it's done by a woman, it's done by a Black, so therefore it's not American imperialism, it's not exploitation, it's not oppression. That's insane. That's absurd.
All right. Let's see. I do not see any. Let's see if there's any more questions or comments.
I have a question for my academic colleagues. As Black academics, as a female academic, as an African in the English, how do you? I'm guilty of speaking my mind and saying what I want. So therefore, I'll never get tenure at any institution because I will say as I please. How, in the face of inequality and the using the other as representation for oppression, how do you all deal with that? For me, I find it problematic. I'm disgusted by people like Obama, people like Kamala Harris, Victoria Nuland. How do you, as academics, reconcile what we're witnessing in your own need or lack thereof to speak truth to power? How do we even my old professor was Dr. Cornel West. I took Black intellectual thought with Cornel West, and some of the nonsense that's coming out of Cornel West's mouth nowadays is just pure garbage. It has no substance. It's speaking the ideology of the elites, and the thing is, he himself doesn't see that what he's saying is destructive to our community. So how do you all as academics deal with some of the issues? Because I deal with it because I say it, I just speak truth to power, regardless of the consequences. But, as I get older and my wife keeps telling me to be quiet,
Ericcson, Ericcson.
Thank you for I think it's yeah, I think it's an essential question, but also a difficult one. But I will try to answer it as best as I can. Yeah, I think it is. I think we find ourselves. I mean, maybe speaking for myself, I find myself in a difficult situation. But I think what's important is, for example, from the theory and the new ways of seeing things. I think as a Black scholar, it's actually looking at what it means, those kind of ideas, knowledge that are revolutionary, so to speak. Because, for example, whenever you are learning in most of these institutions, white institutions, the knowledge you are told this is what you have to sort of like know and so forth. So whenever there's something that is new, it creates that kind of hope. But in terms of actually what people do, be it in a church or more on a political scale, it is difficult to. I suppose was last week I was part of another lecture when someone was talking about the role of public theology in society, and one of the things we were trying to look at was how can we disagree in a safe space, or is it possible for all of us, regardless of our differences, to come together and dialogue. I think that's the interesting bit, because I work in a multi-faith context where obviously we've got different people from different religions and so forth. Although I might have different views from some of the people there, I think the main thing is to realize is that, as I suppose from my own Christian perspective, is to find out, is there anything of value that is within each human being that I can celebrate when I see them, regardless of obviously their perspective or whatever that they may be thinking. Or maybe to put it in another way, if there is error in whatever that they are doing or saying, how can I suppose, how can I let them be while still maintaining my own integrity? It's realizing that this is for them, is not mine. So for example, whatever, for example, the perspective that are shared by some of our institutions, they are interesting, but it's also to ask, so for me, for example, I ask those same questions to myself. How will I respond? How do I feel about this kind of things? And if I'm not comfortable, I try to obviously to speak it out to those people that I look after or something like that. So I try to remain genuine and follow my conscience, but also have that intellectual humility, so to speak, to say that I might be wrong as well, which is also difficult sometimes. But yeah, but I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that's yeah.
There's a question for Dr. Tomlin. Can you please ensure how you think that third wave feminism is relevant to current events or issues?
That's a really good question. I think the third wave feminism, in terms of the alternative form, because the third wave feminism, which according to the definition is the fight for integration and equality from 2000 to the present. So third wave feminism isn't really the frame of reference, it's the alternative form. And from my point of view, the alternative form, I come from a very much Christian kingdom, Paul will tell you straight down the line, and I think it feeds into your question too, Paul. Without being unduly pessimistic, I don't really have much hope for humanity. And I'm not being unduly pessimistic. I think when we look at what we see around on a global scale, on a local scale, it doesn't leave me with much glee or hope within any system. So I think all forms of social systems currently are oppressive, are not liberating. So I don't really have hope in any system but the system of the kingdom, which is outlined as a frame of reference in the Bible. That's as much as I can say. And to answer your question, Paul, because I think that's an important question. When I was working in the academy, it's interesting because whereas perhaps I should say quite a few Black scholars, a few that there are or were in England at the time, would fight for representation, funnily enough, and fight for equality of opportunity, and fight for justice, and fight. I already knew that the system was iniquitous, was wicked. I already knew that the system was unjust. So I didn't feel that my energy should be along that line of fighting an unjust system. That's just myself. So, as I said, as a Christian minister, my frame of reference now is to speak the truth of the Bible, and I see that as the absolute truth, which is often counter to the truth that's presented out there in the world. So, for example, and I kind of mentioned this before, I tend to see quite a few things in terms of black and white, all this gender fluidity, for me, that is highly problematic. And I do come from a traditional Christian point of view. That's not to say, of course, I have compassion, love, and respect humanity, but I maintain that there is a social order that we and one that's not oppressive. There is a social order, there is a biological order. X and Y is X and Y. There is a biological order, for example, that remains constant. So the representation, the equality issue, which is an attempt to make the world equal, is a farce. It's a complete farce. And we can see, especially in the global West, where everything is about money, capitalism, consumerism, it doesn't seem to be diminishing anytime soon. So that's my reflection based on your question and that of what Paul was posing in terms of how do I see my role. Now I'm independent and I mainly do ministry, as you know, Paul. So my whole frame of reference is about the ministry. And yes, I do think we're living in revelations. There's no doubt about that for me. So I'm not fighting the system, Paul. I'm not. I think that's a waste of time, fighting a system that's not going to change. Now, do I believe that I should still be sitting at the back of the bus? Of course not. Do I believe that I shouldn't get equal pay? Of course. Those things for me are parts of my human rights. That's part of my humanity, as Frantz Fanon has highlighted. So, of course, but I'm not fighting an iniquitous system through representation. No, because, I'll leave it at that.
Marina D, thanks, Carol. I wanted to respond to Marie about Cornel West. In grad school, I had a huge issue with Cornell because of this push, which is represented by postmodernism and post-structuralism on the other, respecting the queer, not respect, but fighting for the queer, LGBTQ, and all the other alphabets. And I pointed out something to him that he didn't take into account. For example, I reviewed a book by an African sister, a Nigerian sister, on Vodou about a month ago, maybe a couple of months ago, in which the sister was arguing that Vodou represents queerism, and all of this LGBTQ. They're free to practice whatever they practice within Vodou. And I highlighted that is not what our system says. And it's this need to highlight and represent and fight for representation. In Haiti, we've always had, and it's part of human history in general, there's always been queer, homosexuality, etc. In Haiti, in our metaphysical system we call Vodou, which is a system, just like the Protestant ethic is a system that comes out of religiosity. Vodou, same thing. what we argue is that all of these representations are a part of life, but that does not mean you murder or you kill a homosexual because they're a homosexual. That doesn't mean you maim someone because of an alternative practice that does no harm to other people. That means you respect life itself. But the Vodou does not promote homosexuality as the way we should organize our lives. That's not what it says. And that was my problem with Cornell, as though we should that certain representation should be promoted in the public sphere to children. Absolutely not. Our religion in Haiti does not say that. I don't believe that should how we constitute religiosity. For example, there's a movement in America now where in Pentecostalism, they're promoting gay marriage, which is contrary to Pentecostalism. You have women, Pentecostal female preachers who are married, and they're promoting this stuff in the public sphere, and they're saying God is love, but that's not even Bible. Because as I understand the Bible, and I'm not a Christian, as I understand the Bible, you come as you are. Yes, you're a sinner, but you don't stay as you are. You should be fighting to repent against whatever, which is why I don't understand how Ericcson deal with the Anglican Church at all, because they're just a bunch of crazies in my mind, but that's a different story. But the thing is, the West is promoting what is dominating their contemporary post-industrial society, and they're bastardizing all other systems to fit within their quote-unquote narrative. And I think this is the same thing Cornel West is doing as well, because there's certain lifestyles we should not promote, because now with this anarchist epistemological anarchy, now you have pederasts fighting for equality. They want to be recognized as lovers of children, not pedophiles. That's insane. But this is the issue we're dealing with. The new system, just like the new system should be just as discriminatory, because all systems are discriminatory. We discriminate as to what is right, what is wrong, what we should promote, what we should not promote. That's all systems. That's the nature of system building, period. So we have to decide what is, because any system we organize have to be built on morality. It's just the nature of system building. But, in this epistemological anarchic world we live in, everything goes, and now you're using representation to bastardize other people's belief systems. You're using representation to bastardize even the teachings of Christianity. I never thought the Bible promoted homosexuality, but now you have pastors and priests. There's a new book that's out currently, just been released, called I think Queering the Black Church.
Yeah. Can I, Paul, remember that's the traditional Pentecostal charismatics like myself are conservative, straight down the line Bible in our views. What some people have done is that they have used the Pentecostal expression to promote what is really anti-Bible. So I just wanted to say that segment is a minority, it's not the majority. However, in academic circles, they are gaining ground. They are gaining ground. And I think particularly within the Black academic circles, and even Black academic theologians among them, because unfortunately, Blacks are looking for allies. And one way of aligning themselves with other groups, by aligning themselves with other groups, I think they feel that puts them more on the road to their own liberation. So that's the strategy. But as you said, we discursively organize society through morality, and through a set of framework which is absolute, there are absolutes. And when we deviate from absolutes, which is what some academics want to do, it becomes highly problematic in terms of the continuation of humanity. It becomes highly problematic. So I personally have a huge problem with the Black academic sphere. I have a problem with Black theology, for example, for the same reason, as you know. So
maybe just to say something that is interesting. So I'm looking at this, Paul, your question in terms of, if we look at nurses, like they've got to join the nursing body to be accredited, or any other professional body. So what I'm saying is that in some of the professions that we do or are part of, there are sort of like standards and sort of like etiquette in terms of, so I think that in a way, I don't know whether it constrains us or or it ties us down such that it becomes difficult sometimes to I suppose to express yourself in a way that might be, you have to be always considerate of others and so forth. So I'm just wondering whether there is something there, I mean, to reflect in terms of, if you're part of, let's say, for example, engineers, or even not even anything, there's some certain ways you have to act in society. Yeah.
And this is, you bring up an excellent point, Ericcson. This is why, the postmodernists and post-structuralists are wrong, because we are limited by the world we experience, how we experience the world. And what postmodernism and post-structuralism want to make the argument is that there are no limitations as to what. You bring up the nursing profession. Yes, they're limited by the nature of reality. Engineers are limited by the mathematics that is represented to us by the reality that we experience. So, but the problem is, what has happened in contemporary society is that the constraints of material reality are replaced by ideologies. So therefore, our experiences are no longer with material reality. Our experiences becomes in relation to the ideas of of representations of that material reality by the power elites. So therefore, our experience is between ideas and not material reality. And that's what postmodernism. So it's easy to make the argument that, yes, anything goes, because when ideas represent material reality, you can defer meaning because you're dealing with ideas. But when you're dealing with material reality, concrete material reality, you'll get in trouble when you want to represent yourself as a woman and when you're a man. There are consequences to that. My wife had a classmate who was murdered because he was prostituting himself as a woman, and he got caught, and a man killed them. There are consequences to when you're not dealing with material reality and you're dealing with ideas, and you feel you can defer meaning and be what you want, do what you want. No, there are consequences for that. Even nature imposes constraints on us, because the modernist attempt coming out of the Enlightenment has been to conquer nature and do as we please with nature. Those are the ideas that come out of many Enlightenment philosophers. So therefore, we view nature as being inferior to where we are as a species. We never see ourselves as a species being, as Marx pointed out. We are living in the earth. We are thrown here. We are constrained by our bodies. We are constrained by the laws of physics. But we want to throw all the laws of physics out the window, all of the laws of material reality, and just deal with the ideas and the ability to defer meaning and ego-centered communicative discourse. That's insane. And Nadine had a question about Haitian Vodou. In Vodou, remember, the spirits are spirits, so they have no sexuality. So when a woman, for example, has a dream about Esli Freda, who represents love, the concept of love in Vodou, and she's sleeping with that woman. That doesn't mean you take that into material reality and say, this is how I am as a woman. I should be a lesbian because I slept with a spirit in my dream. That's not what voodoo is saying. And a lot of Westerners try to impose that on voodoo. No, that's not what voodoo says. Voodoo says the spirits choose you, and they choose you in different facets. The ancestors choose you, and they choose you in different facets. So, but because of the perverse westernization of reality that we're experiencing now, we want to impose anything on the metaphysical system. No, that's absurd. Lou, you can take over, brother. I'm tired, and I know it back in UK it's about 10, almost 10 o'clock.
Well,
The
once
tired-
again, yeah, everybody's tired. Well,
Yeah.
this was as always, we had a great conversation. I think Dr. Mocombe, Dr. Tomlin, and Dr. Ericcson Mapfumo, of course, our lovely, energetic audience for their engagement. Well, guys, the this conversation, the recording will be posted on the website, and I'll post the link on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, you know it. Again, congratulations on this important book. Is there a third one coming up?
Multipolarism, and then we have to do my two books, my textbook on structuration theory, and my one on the empirical evidence for the consciousness field.
Yeah, our next book launch is set for July 26. All right. Well, you guys in the UK, have a great night.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, yes.
Okay. All right.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah, good night.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you,
Yeah, thank you.
Nadine, Marina, for your questions and for appearing on Zoom with us. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Lou. Thank you, Paul Ericcson. Good night.
Thank you. Yeah, good night. Yeah.
Good night.
Bye-bye.